At 2:17 p.m. on a winter afternoon, a refrigerated semi-truck rolled along a two-lane highway outside San Antonio.
We executed the largest fentanyl bust in the history of the U.S.
Federal agents in New York City making the largest meth bust in recent history.
1.7 million pills, meth, and more taken off the street.
The DEA says this case is connected to both the Sinaloa and the Jalisco cartels in Mexico.
The vehicle was flagged into a commercial inspection zone as part of a routine traffic checkpoint. The trailer belonged to a nationally registered logistics carrier with thousands of verified contracts across the United States. Its paperwork showed 25 tons of fresh produce, tomatoes and lettuce, destined for a distribution hub in the Midwest. The driver presented a valid commercial license, a clean safety record, and a cargo manifest that matched the electronic logs. The temperature inside the trailer was held at exactly 34 degrees, the standard setting for perishable freight. Nothing in the documentation raised concern. The truck had completed this route many times, following the same schedule used by hundreds of other vehicles operated by the same company. Weight readings were within tolerance. Fuel logs aligned with distance. To inspectors, the vehicle appeared to be an ordinary unit moving food through the national supply chain. A K-9 unit was deployed as part of secondary screening. The handler guided the dog along the rear axle and beneath the floor of the trailer. The animal paused and sat, indicating an odor source near the undercarriage. The response was immediate but controlled. Inspectors began a physical search of the cargo, removing stacked crates of produce and checking the interior walls for tampering. Nothing was visible. The refrigeration panels were intact. No loose seals, no gaps, no signs of forced entry. A portable density scanner was brought to the scene. When aimed at the floor of the trailer, it detected a structural anomaly. The lower panel measured several inches thicker than factory specifications. Technicians retrieved tools and removed a series of bolts securing the steel plate beneath the cargo. When the panel was lifted, the insulation layer was missing. In its place was a concealed compartment, precisely fitted between reinforced beams. Inside the cavity were vacuum-sealed packages arranged in uniform stacks. Laboratory testing later confirmed the contents as high-purity methamphetamine. The total weight exceeded 100 kilograms. The estimated market value surpassed $8 million. The compartment had been engineered to remain undetected by standard inspections, calibrated to avoid triggering weight and balance sensors used at highway checkpoints. The driver was placed in custody and moved to the roadside. His statements were consistent and limited. He described a 6-year employment history with the carrier, more than 600,000 miles driven, and no direct access to cargo beyond sealed pallets. Electronic logs showed nothing unusual in his route or timing. He had not deviated from the company's assigned schedule. Inside a federal interview room, analysts reviewed his shipping data alongside internal logistics records. His deliveries matched hundreds of other drivers operating under the same dispatch system. The concealed compartment could only be opened by removing specific pallets in a precise sequence, a process not disclosed to drivers. Hydraulic supports beneath the trailer floor masked the added weight. The design indicated the truck itself had been modified, not used opportunistically. That conclusion altered the scope of the inquiry. A single smuggling attempt would not require custom-built infrastructure. A fleet designed to transport hidden cargo would. Investigators began reviewing registration data, maintenance logs, and inspection histories tied to the carrier. The company, a well-established logistics firm with more than a decade of operations, employed hundreds of drivers and maintained multiple depots across Texas. It held contracts with major retail chains and had passed every federal safety audit. As evening fell, attention shifted from the seized truck to the organization that owned it. Intelligence units examined warehouse leases, repair invoices, and shipping patterns. One facility near Corpus Christi, registered as a cold storage site, drew particular scrutiny. Its location placed it close to maritime access points while remaining outside the footprint of major ports. The property had operated for years without triggering regulatory concern. Engineering diagrams obtained from maintenance vendors revealed repeated trailer modifications performed off-site. Certain units were routed through a private garage where refrigeration floors were rebuilt and hydraulic systems installed. These trailers were then returned to active service without documentation of the structural changes in standard compliance records. What emerged was a pattern. A subset of the fleet followed routes that were longer, less efficient, and more expensive on paper. Those same routes were compensated through unusual maintenance charges and consulting fees paid to affiliated firms. The arrangement kept financial losses hidden while trucks continued moving along the same corridors. By midnight, analysts concluded that the truck stopped at 2:17 p.m. was not isolated. It was part of a controlled network using legitimate logistics infrastructure to move concealed cargo across state lines. The discovery on the highway had exposed only a fraction of the system, but it was enough to confirm that a far larger operation was already in motion. With the highway seizure confirmed, investigators expanded their focus to the company's internal structure. The logistics carrier was not a shell or a front operating from a rented office. It was a full-scale enterprise with payrolls, insurance coverage, and a national client list. More than 500 drivers were on its roster. Its trucks entered distribution centers every day, delivering produce, dairy, and frozen goods to some of the largest retailers in the country. On the surface, it functioned exactly as a reputable carrier should. Behind that appearance, a second layer existed. Analysts identified approximately 100 trailers designated internally as priority units. These vehicles were routed through a private maintenance yard not listed in standard vendor registries. There, technicians installed reinforced subfloors and hydraulic lift systems designed to conceal dense cargo beneath refrigerated compartments. The modifications were permanent and engineered to survive years of commercial use without detection. Financial records revealed how the work was hidden. The added construction costs were not listed as structural alterations. They were billed as routine refrigeration repairs, insulation upgrades, and mechanical servicing. Each invoice was kept below reporting thresholds that would trigger automatic regulatory review. Individually, the charges appeared ordinary. In aggregate, they represented a continuous stream of funds paying for specialized smuggling infrastructure. Parallel to the equipment trail was a protection network. More than 20 individuals connected to transportation oversight, zoning approvals, and logistics regulation had intervened on the company's behalf over the years. There were no written agreements or direct payments recorded. Instead, investigators found phone records, meeting schedules, and correspondence that showed how inspections were delayed, permits expedited, and compliance issues quietly closed. The result was not immunity but invisibility. The most significant asset tied to the network was not on the highway. It was beneath a warehouse near the Gulf Coast. Satellite imagery and utility records led analysts to a reinforced structure registered as a cold storage annex. Ground-penetrating scans later confirmed what paperwork had concealed: a purpose-built underground corridor extending more than 1,400 feet. The tunnel connected the warehouse to an unregistered coastal access point. It was wide enough to move palletized cargo by forklift, allowing sealed loads to travel from maritime entry directly into the domestic transport fleet. Estimates based on throughput capacity showed that between 30 and 40 tons of narcotics could pass through the corridor each year without appearing in public port records. From there, modified trailers distributed the cargo across the same highway routes used to move food. The logistics system provided both cover and speed. Once the tunnel was identified, the operation was no longer a single seizure or even a corporate fraud case. It was a fixed smuggling gateway embedded in commercial infrastructure. Federal command authorized a coordinated response designed to isolate the entire network at once. More than 400 agents from multiple agencies were deployed to two focal points: the warehouse complex near the coast and the company's headquarters in San Antonio. At the same time, mobile teams were positioned along interstate corridors in 12 states. Their objective was to intercept every priority trailer before the network could adapt. At precisely 4 a.m., the operation began. Highway exits were closed without sirens. Way stations that normally opened at dawn were staffed with armed inspection teams. The first refrigerated unit was stopped less than 2 minutes after the signal was given. Beneath stacked crates of produce, officers found vacuum-sealed packages labeled and numbered like inventory. By 4:18 a.m., more than 24 trucks had been detained. By 4:41 a.m., the number had doubled. Each stop followed the same pattern: routine inspection, concealed compartment, identical packaging. The network that had operated in silence for years was being mapped in real time across the country. Simultaneously, tactical teams breached the company's headquarters. Servers were removed while still powered on. Executives were detained inside offices that had passed regulatory review for more than a decade. In Corpus Christi, another team entered the warehouse and reached the underground corridor. Inside were forklifts, half-wrapped pallets, and stacks of narcotics staged for transport before sunrise. Within the first 2 hours, more than 9 tons of drugs had been secured, financial accounts were frozen, and hundreds of communications channels went dark. The system that relied on constant motion was being forced to stop everywhere at once. By midday, the scale of the shutdown became visible through numbers rather than scenes. Preliminary tallies from the coordinated stops confirmed seizures in every region where the carrier operated. Trailers were held under federal control at highway shoulders, distribution yards, and weigh stations across a dozen states. Each vehicle was logged, photographed, and stripped of identifying markings as evidence teams began cataloging the hidden compartments. At the headquarters in San Antonio, technicians worked through the night extracting data from seized servers. More than 90 terabytes of internal records were recovered in the first 24 hours. On the surface, the files reflected the image of a model logistics firm. Delivery schedules, maintenance logs, safety audits, insurance policies. But when analysts overlaid shipment data with financial activity, patterns began to appear. More than 1,000 routes taken over 7 years followed paths that were deliberately inefficient. Fuel costs were higher than necessary. Transit times were extended without operational justification. These routes showed losses on paper, yet the company remained profitable. The discrepancy was explained by a parallel accounting stream. Those same routes were reimbursed through inflated service contracts, consulting fees, and repair invoices paid to entities that existed only as mailing addresses. Each transaction stayed below automated reporting thresholds. Together, they moved hundreds of millions of dollars without triggering review. Vehicle identification numbers added another layer. A database crosscheck revealed that some trailer IDs appeared in 2 separate federal systems. One set corresponded to ordinary food deliveries. The other was quietly linked to narcotics seizures from unrelated cases in different states. The trucks had dual identities, allowing them to pass inspections under one profile while operating in a separate shadow registry. Subpoenas were issued overnight. Dozens of bank accounts were frozen across 4 states. Insurance carriers, maintenance firms, and shell corporations tied to the payment network were reclassified as criminal co-conspirators. The operation was no longer defined by the drugs seized on the highway. It was defined by how deeply the financial structure had been embedded inside legitimate commerce. Analysts calculated that the same system could support the movement of more than 50 tons of methamphetamine without triggering a single mandatory audit. The documentation was not falsified. Every form was filed. Every signature was valid. The rules had been followed in a way that made detection statistically unlikely. With the tunnel sealed and the fleet immobilized, the investigation shifted again. Public health and shipping data were compared to determine what had already passed through the network. 7 years of delivery records were matched against hospital admissions, overdose reports, and emergency response logs in counties served by the priority routes. The correlation was immediate. Regions receiving regular shipments from the carrier showed meth-related overdose rates far above national averages. In those areas, emergency rooms had reported sudden surges that strained rural facilities. Teenagers and older adults appeared in the same datasets, often within days of major delivery windows. Drivers were called in as witnesses. Many had spent decades on the road with clean records and no criminal history. When shown diagrams of the concealed compartments, some expressed shock. Others recalled reporting unusual weight distribution or handling problems years earlier. In multiple cases, those reports had been logged and then removed from internal systems without explanation. Investigators determined that the drivers were not liabilities. They were camouflage. Long employment histories, consistent routes, and spotless records made their trucks less likely to face scrutiny. When a driver retired or questioned irregularities, another was assigned to the same vehicle. The infrastructure remained unchanged. Child welfare and public health agencies added their own data. Counties along the routes recorded sharp increases in family separations linked to substance abuse. Foster care systems reported surges that matched delivery schedules. The damage was not random. It followed the same highways used by the fleet. By the time analysts finished compiling the data, conservative models suggested that the network had contributed to tens of thousands of premature deaths over 7 years. Not through violence or conflict, but through continuous, regulated delivery disguised as commerce. The seizures had stopped the flow, but the impact was already written into communities connected by the same roads. The days following the shutdown brought a different set of measurements. Intelligence units tracking illicit markets reported a sudden disruption across multiple regions. Within 72 hours, street prices for methamphetamine surged sharply, in some areas tripling. Distribution channels that had operated with routine stability went silent. Vehicles were abandoned mid-route. Encrypted networks stopped transmitting halfway through transactions. Thousands of active nodes disappeared from monitoring systems in a single day. The change was not driven by enforcement pressure alone. It was caused by absence. The logistics pipeline that had fed those markets had been removed without warning, and no replacement infrastructure was ready to take its place. In Washington, emergency briefings were convened behind closed doors. Transportation, commerce, and public safety officials were called to testify on how a regulated carrier had operated for 15 years without triggering a comprehensive review. Audit records showed consistent compliance. Safety scores were among the highest in the industry. The automated systems designed to identify risk had instead reinforced trust, allowing scrutiny to fade as familiarity increased. Within days, the company's operating licenses were revoked. Properties were secured. Assets were seized. The brand that had been visible on highways nationwide was removed from trucks, uniforms, and signage. More than 500 drivers were suddenly without employment. Many learned through news reports that their work had been tied to a criminal enterprise. Federal teams conducted briefings not to interrogate, but to explain what had been discovered. For some, the realization was more damaging than the legal uncertainty. They had believed they were part of a system that kept food moving. Along the former delivery corridors, a temporary calm followed. Emergency rooms reported declines in drug-related admissions. Local law enforcement noted reductions in burglary and assault tied to substance abuse. Shelters saw fewer overnight intakes. The changes were fragile but measurable. Analysts cautioned that the model uncovered was not unique. It represented a refined use of legitimate infrastructure to move prohibited cargo at scale. The same principles, compliance, automation, and trust, could be adapted elsewhere. The network that had been dismantled was one example, not a singular anomaly. Final tallies were released to internal agencies. More than 50 tons of narcotics seized. Over 1 million pills removed from circulation. Hundreds of arrests across multiple states. Millions in financial assets frozen. Each number marked a component of a system that had been operating in parallel with the national supply chain. Yet behind the figures were effects that could not be reversed. Communities altered by years of exposure. Families disrupted. Healthcare systems strained. The operation had ended the movement of cargo, but it had also exposed how easily regulated frameworks could be used to distribute harm when oversight relied on consistency rather than verification. As the investigation moved from enforcement to review, one conclusion remained clear inside federal reports. The network had not survived by avoiding the system. It had survived by becoming indistinguishable from it. The morning after the final arrests did not resemble a conclusion. Command centers continued processing evidence, updating ledgers, and reconciling data streams that had only begun to reveal their full scope. Seized trucks sat in secured lots with their engines cold, routes permanently closed. What had once moved on schedules measured in minutes now waited on inventory tags and chain of custody forms. Market monitoring units issued one last consolidated report. The supply shock was holding. In regions that had depended on the disrupted routes, distribution networks remained fragmented, unable to reorganize around a pipeline that no longer existed. The absence was not temporary. It was structural. The infrastructure that had made large-scale movement possible had been dismantled at every point where it touched regulated commerce. Oversight agencies began rewriting inspection protocols. Automated trust models were flagged for review. The assumption that consistent compliance equaled safety was no longer considered sufficient. New frameworks were proposed to detect patterns of efficiency that were too stable to be natural, financial flows too clean to be random, and routing systems too precise to be accidental. For the former employees of the carrier, the reckoning was personal. Some faced legal scrutiny. Many did not. But all were left with the same realization. A company they believed was ordinary had been something else entirely. The trucks they had driven, the warehouses they had visited, the logs they had signed had been part of a system that moved more than freight. In the communities along the old corridors, the effects of the shutdown were still unfolding. Public health agencies continued to track admissions. Schools and social services reported gradual changes. The data suggested improvement, but also showed how deeply the previous years had cut. Recovery would take longer than any investigation. Internally, the case was summarized in a final assessment. The network had combined legitimate licensing, real contracts, and regulatory approval into a single operating shield. It had not relied on secrecy alone. It had relied on routine. That, more than any tunnel or hidden compartment, had been its greatest protection. The vehicles that once carried concealed cargo were now evidence. Their logos removed, their doors sealed, their futures limited to court records and storage yards. The roads they traveled were open again, but the routes they followed no longer existed. What remained was a lesson recorded not in headlines but in procedures. Systems designed to move goods at scale can also move harm if left to trust their own metrics. The operation had proven that precision could be used in either direction. When the last inventory sheet was signed and the final trailer locked, the network was gone. The damage it left behind was not. That was written into years of deliveries, thousands of invoices, and communities that had absorbed the cost without ever seeing the trucks that brought it.